The Art of Being Ruled. Wyndham Lewis. Original publication 1926. 1989 edition. Narrated by Skeptical Waves. Part 12. The Intellectual. Chapter 2. Fourier's intellectual contrasted with Sorel's. I will get at the question by way of Fourier. I hope that the rather extensive quotation with which I shall begin will not be found fatiguing. He is one of the thinkers most in vogue at present with the Russian Communist Party. He is one of the great figures of 19th century revolutionary thought. No résumé of a doctrine can be so effective as is even a short extract, with the actual words of the person who held it with such authority as did Fourier. The philosophers, accustomed to reverence everything which comes in the name and under the sanction of commerce, will consecrate their servile powers to celebrating the new order's, praises. Its result will be an industrial inquisition, subordinating the whole people to the affiliated monopolists. Such are the melancholy results of our confidence in social guides who have no other object than to raise themselves by political intrigue to position and fortune. Philosophy needed some new subject to replace the old theological controversies. It was therefore to the golden calf, to commerce, that it turned its eyes. It is no longer to the muses nor to their votaries, but to traffic and its heroes, that fame now consecrates her 100 voices. The true grandeur of a nation, its only glory, according to the economists, is to sell to neighboring nations more clothes and calicoes than we purchase of them. The savants of the 19th century are those who explain to us the mysteries of the stock market. Poesy and the fine arts are disdained, and the temple of fame is open no longer except to those who tell us why sugars are feeble, why soap is firm. Since philosophy has conceived a passion for commerce, polyhymnia decks the new science with flowers. The tenderest expressions have replaced the old language of the merchants, and it is now said, in elegant phrase, that sugars are languid, that is, are falling, that soaps are looking up, that is, have advanced. Formerly maneuvers of monopoly excited the indignation of writers, but now these schemes are a title to distinction, and fame announces them in a Pindaric strain, saying, a rapid and unexpected movement has suddenly taken place in soaps, at which words we seem to see bars of soap leap from their boxes and wing their way to the clouds, while the speculators in soap hear their names resound through the whole land. All those flowers of rhetoric contribute, doubtless, to the success of industry, which has found in the support of the philosophers the same kind of assistance they have extended to the people, namely, fine phrases, but no results. That would seem at first sight to be the attitude of the social revolutionary towards the philosopher or the intellectual with which we are now familiar. It is an archaic example of the policy that is illustrated in the title of Berth's Sorelian treatise, Les Méfaits des Intellectuels. But it differs very much in reality from a great deal of anti-highbrow socialist doctrine. In the first place, it shares with the later syndicalists their bitter hostility, so well exemplified in Sorel, to the affiliated monopolists. A centralized power was as much the bugbear of Fourier as it is of the syndicalist. The syndicat and the phalanstère are both little, dispersionist, idyllic forts against monopoly. Sorel's syndics, or autonomous occupational communities, are both sentimental, or poetical, in origin. Both bear the stigmata of the democratic regime. But, strangely enough, they both serve in their way the power of monopoly and centralized administration. Considerant, Fourier's great disciple, emphasizes the non-communistic nature of his master's system. And Sorel was rigidly non-communistic. There would be a scale of remuneration corresponding to merit. How elastic in practice this condition can be is witnessed in Russia, where, as Mr. Farbman shows us, communism is no more than a name. But as a theorist, Fourier would have been horror-struck at the centralized dictatorship of Soviet Russia and its Marxian perpetuation of capitalist conditions. Sorel admires it very much and has abandoned syndicalism. Fourier would probably have admired it very much too, and have abandoned Fourierism. But Fourier differs principally in the nature of his attack on the philosophers by his attitude to poesy and the fine arts on the one hand, and to commerce, industrialism, and the new science of economy on the other. Since philosophy has conceived a passion for commerce, which would have described for him, no doubt, the case of Marx, the muses are employed to embellish its products, to wreathe its soaps, cold creams, boot polishes, and toothpastes in flowers of rhetoric. In short, it was the opening of the epoch of great advertisement and big business that he was hailing with disgust. With centralization and universal control, however, which Fourier disliked, the sickly rage of advertisement would also pass. When there was only one state brand of soap that everyone would have to buy or take because there was no other, the need to tell them in gigantic letters on every hoarding that they would keep their schoolgirl complexions if they used it, would be no longer necessary. And their complexions, in the sequel, would be neither less nor more schoolgirlish than before. The ridiculous announcement, merely, would have disappeared. The difference, then, between Fourier's objection to the philosopher, and Péguy's to the intellectual, is that the former objects to him on diametrically opposite grounds. Whereas Fourier objects to him because he is the advocate of sordid industrialism, economics, and the practical side of life, Péguy's or Sorel's objection is that he is too poetical, unpractical, too much a word man, the man of the word, Vuzy, and not of the stream known by that name. So there was a complete reversal of attitude between the time of Fourier and that of Péguy and Sorel. Listen to Fourier, for instance, on the subject of France's great shopkeeping neighbor and political rival, England. Because an insular nation, favored by the commercial indolence of France, has enriched itself by monopoly and maritime spoliation, behold all the old doctrines of philosophy disdained, commerce extolled as the only road to truth, to wisdom, and to happiness, and the merchants become the pillars of the state. One is ready to believe in magic on seeing kings and empires thus circumvented by a few commercial sophisms, and the race of monopolists, stock jobbers, agitateurs exalted to the skies who employ their influence in concentrating masses of capital, in producing fluctuations in the price of products, ruining alternately all branches of industry. That is the French agriculturist mind speaking, associated, of course, with traditional political antagonism. It is what has been the distinguishing attitude of the Frenchman until recently. Now, of course, that is changing. The Anglo-Saxon idea, the commercial idea, has gained the day, and Europe is standardizing itself on Anglo-Saxon lines. It will soon be, perhaps, the British Chestertonian smallholders of the future who will be cursing their rich neighbors across the Channel for their soulless industrialism. But, however that may be, it is evident that this attitude towards a great and successful industrial nation, with exactly a 30-year start of Europe, as Marx estimated it, is not at all the approved attitude of the moment. It would not conform to the most widely held contemporary doctrine of the revolutionary state. So we have to pick our way. The intellectual of Fourier's day was in the opposite camp, and an opposite person, to the intellectual of today. I hold that the intellectuals or philosophers of Fourier's denunciations were darker villains than those of a later dispensation, facing in the opposite direction. Actually, I believe that Péguy and Sorel were without knowing it invectivating themselves, both were nearer to Fourier than they were to those philosophers he so much disliked. Both were more enamored, no doubt, of poesy and the fine arts than their socialist ticket would have allowed them to confess. They were too glad to avoid discussing economics, which is no less repellent a subject for being got up to look like a philosophy. Indeed, the first thing to strike you in the theory of revolutionary syndicalism is the entire absence of economics. History, luckily, takes the place of economics, and the coup de poing and the coup d'etat take the place of ridiculous visionary economics for futures that are extremely unlikely ever to be heard of again, once the coups de poing have done their work. But how was it that such strong-minded, clear-headed people as Péguy and Sorel came to attack and abuse themselves and their intellect so heartily? Why did they so vociferously declaim against what was the most remarkable thing about them, without knowing apparently that they were addressing these hard words to themselves all the time? Bergson, as has already been said, was a good deal responsible for that. So we must turn to him for an explanation of it. He has been the great organizer of disintegration in the modern world. It is he who has found all the reasons, eloquently dressed in a style that bribes one in advance, as William James says of it, for the destruction of the things of the intellect, and the handing over to sensation of the privileges and heirlooms of the mind, and the enslaving of the intelligent to the affective nature. His philosophy of movement and change makes him the best spokesman of the life lived by the typical American businessman. The vulgar frenzy of Nietzsche, and Bergson's gospel of fluidity and illiquation, form in about equal measure the philosophic basis of futurism and similar movements. Further, as Benda shows with such admirable force, it is the implications of Bergsonism that provide the best system of defense or aggression for the mundane enemy of the mind and lover of sensation. His is a doctrine of sensation for sensation's sake, a worthy fellow of art for art's sake. His is the ideal apology for the worst and ugliest salon of the worst of all possible millionaire worlds. Julien Benda has not left much in Bergson worth destroying in his Le Bergsonisme, ou une philosophie de la mobilité, and other books. But I will very briefly examine Bergsonism here, especially as it applies to the material and objects of the present essay. The causes of Bergsonism, again, are not dealt with by Benda, except by implication.